Welcome to the Supreme Court Podcast. All opinions expressed in this podcast do not reflect the views of the Supreme Court. For clarity, the text of the decision prevails.
Refugees are a normal people. They are in a certain situation that they can no longer go back to their country, or they have to seek help of another country to stay in. They are ordinary fathers, sons, brothers, and sisters. They just look for a place to live peacefully in.
According to the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, 122.6 million people worldwide have been forcibly displaced as of the end of June 2024 due to persecution, conflict, violence, human rights violations, or events seriously disturbing public order. This translates to 43.7 million refugees, 72.1 million internally displaced people, and 8 million asylum seekers. On June 20 of every year, a date designated by the United Nations as World Refugee Day, the world honors the strength and courage of these people who have been forced to flee their home countries to escape conflict or persecution. This global observance brings attention to the rights, needs, and aspirations of refugees and calls for commitment to ending conflicts and finding solutions to their plight. Why does the world observe World Refugee Day, and what relevance does it have for Filipinos today? Hi, I'm Atty. Mike Navallo, Supreme Court Chief Communications Officer. It's the 20th of June 2025, World Refugee Day. On part 1 of this two-part episode, we discuss key concepts related to refugees and stateless persons, as well as the significance of celebrating World Refugee Day. Next week, on part 2, we will talk about the rule on facilitated naturalization of refugees and stateless persons. And joining us to talk about this topic are Judge Maria Josefina G. San Juan-Torres, member of the Supreme Court Special Committee on the Facilitated Naturalization for Refugees and Stateless Individuals, and Attorney Maria Ermina Valdeavilla-Gallardo, head of the Philippines Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. Hi, Judge Joy. Hi, Attorney Iya. Thank you for traveling all the way to Morong, Rizal, to record this podcast with us. Welcome to the Supreme Court Podcast.
Hello, Attorney Mike. How are you?
Good.
Thank you for inviting UNHCR, Attorney Mike.
We're happy to have you, Attorney Iya. And later, we will be joined by a refugee turned naturalized Filipino citizen, Mr. Jalal Aboughaula, who will be joining us via Zoom. But first off, Attorney Iya, Judge Joy, today is June 20, actually World Refugee Day. Why is it important to celebrate it globally and locally? What's the significance? You want to go ahead, Judge Joy?
All right. World Refugee Day is recognized and celebrated worldwide. No, it's actually not considered to be a holiday, but more of a global recognition of the strength, courage, and determination of refugees, stateless persons, and asylum seekers, focusing on their resilience and their hope to find a place that they will call home eventually. So for the Philippines, while since we are signatories to the different conventions, the 1951 Refugee Convention and its 1967 Protocol, the 1954 Convention relating to the stateless status of stateless persons, and the 1961 Convention relating to the reduction of statelessness. The Philippines continues its commitment and its pledges with regard to the pledges and commitments under these international human rights instruments, especially those relating to refugees and stateless persons. So last 2023, under Presidential Proclamation number 265, the President proclaimed June 20, not just a part of World Refugee Day, but also as National Refugee Day. So in the Philippines, we also recognize that as part of our local celebration in terms of emphasizing and honoring the spirit and determination of asylum seekers, particularly refugees and stateless persons who are here in the Philippines.
And Attorney Iya, you're working for an agency of the UN that deals directly with refugees. How
That's right.
important is it that there's not just national recognition, but global recognition of refugees?
I think Judge Joy explained very well the value of having a dedicated day to commemorate and be in solidarity with the courage of people who have been forcibly displaced, such as refugees. So it's a constant reminder for the international community that behind June 20 is a story of each individual, a journey that they have had to endure in order to arrive to a safer place. It's also important to note that it's a time where we could reflect on how the government or us as citizens could help in empowering refugees who are trying to rebuild their lives in a foreign land, such as the Philippines. So we are very happy in UNHCR that the Philippine government has also acknowledged the importance of declaring their own National Refugee Day to enjoin, to encourage not only the different departments of the government, but also civil society organizations, the academe, and each society to think about how they could help in supporting the fostering of an inclusive society that would allow refugees to be able to rebuild their lives, something that they are not able to do in their own countries of origin.
And globally, according to statistics from UNHCR, there are about 122.6 million people worldwide who have been forcibly displaced. This is as of end of June 2004 or 2024. And you have about 43.7 million refugees, 72.1 million internally displaced people, 8 million asylum seekers. So to our listeners right now who may not be familiar with these terms, right? Maybe Attorney Iya, you can explain to us when you talk about forcibly displaced, internally displaced, refugees, asylum seekers, what do we mean by these terms?
That's a very good question because oftentimes we tend to be confused on what is the status of a person and what makes a person a refugee or an asylum seeker. So I'll probably begin with the definition of who a refugee is. It's a legal and technical definition that we can find in the 1951 Refugee Convention. And it probably could be best explained by mentioning the different elements. So in the convention, it says that any person who is forced to flee due to a well-founded fear, so you have that element, a well-founded fear of persecution on the ground of race, nationality, religion, membership of a particular social group or political opinion, who is unwilling or unable to return to the country of origin or habitual residence in the case of a person without a nationality, is considered as a refugee. So what does it mean? It means that the circumstances behind the displacement of the person is forcible. It's not voluntary on the part of the person. The person is trying to escape potential harm on his liberty or on his life. So that's the concept of refugee. And again, this is a legal definition. It's important to emphasize that it is a legal definition because there is a certain degree of international protection that goes with that status.
Right.
So it's important that people would know that. Now, when you talk about asylum seeker, they may have the same grounds as the refugees, but because they would still have to be evaluated whether they really are refugees under the definition, or if they are meeting the criteria under the definition, if they are deserving. So some people may be falling under the definition of a refugee, of the refugee under the convention, but oftentimes, because of things that they've done, they would not be deserving of that. So that's an asylum seeker. When you talk about the stateless person, again, this is a legal definition. You can find this in the 1954 Convention relating to the status of stateless persons. And as Judge Joy said, Philippines signed and is a state party to the 1954 convention. It says that any person who is not considered as a national by any state under the operation of its laws is a stateless person. So simply put, people without a nationality.
Right.
Right? Now, you have this concept of internally displaced persons. Unlike refugees and stateless person, where you can find the definition in the international conventions, there is no international convention for internally displaced persons. But there are certain international standards that can be found in soft law, which is the guiding principles on internal displacement, which basically describes, I'm not even saying define because it's not a convention, it describes that any person who has been forced to flee one's habitual residence by reasons such as human rights violations, generalized armed conflict, and even natural hazards, for example, or development aggression, but without having to move to another international border, is considered an internally displaced person. Why is it important to emphasize the different descriptions or definitions of these population groups? We always say that having to identify the correct status of these people based on the circumstances will help states identify the approach to durable solutions. And when we talk about durable solutions, we're talking about long-lasting solutions that would put an end to their status. It's important to address them with the correct terminology so that when we try to assess the case from point of view of ending their status, we would have the right solutions. For example, stateless people, the durable solution there is for them to acquire nationality. Right?
Right.
For refugees, it could be they return. That's the optimal solution. When conditions permit them to become, to be allowed to return in dignity and in safety, then return to their country of origin.
Right.
But oftentimes, circumstances in the country of origin would not permit them to do so. So the other option is for them to be locally integrated. And precisely the facilitated naturalization is a testament that it can be done in the country of asylum. You can be locally integrated over time as a refugee and acquire citizenship of the country that has adopted you.
Who makes the determination, though, Attorney Ia, if you can be considered a refugee or you can be considered an asylum seeker or an internally displaced person? Is there a requirement that the courts should determine that, or can the state actually say, you are a refugee and therefore you're entitled to these legal rights?
Okay, so determination is relevant for refugees and stateless, not necessarily IDPs, right? Under the international principle, it's the states who have responsibility, primary responsibility to assess who is a refugee and who is a stateless person. And each jurisdiction would have their own procedures. So if I may speak here in the Philippines, there is a dedicated unit within the Department of Justice that undertakes the assessment of applications filed by asylum seekers and by those who would like to be declared as stateless people. And that is the Refugees and Stateless Persons Protection Unit under the Department of Justice, and they have been doing this since 1998. In certain countries where the state is either unwilling to do the assessment or unable because of the lack of capacity, it's actually the UNHCR that does it. However, the unfortunate thing is that in those jurisdictions where it's UNHCR that undertakes the assessment of the decisions, the resulting recognition is sometimes not honored. No? It's sometimes not honored by certain countries because they're saying that they're not party to the convention. But when you look at the convention, it's a very old instrument, but very relevant until now. The cornerstone of that convention is the principle of non-refoulement, right? Regardless of whether a state is a party or signed or did not sign the Refugee Convention, they are bound by that. They cannot forcibly return asylum seekers, refugees to the frontiers of the territories where the lives may be in peril.
Right. And let's localize this discussion, Judge Joy. And as Attorney Ia has mentioned briefly, there's a specific department under the DOJ handling this. But in the Philippines, do we follow the treatment and the definition of refugees and stateless persons in international instruments that we're parties to? I mean, how do we handle refugees here in the Philippines?
All right. Maybe we can look at it within the context of what is really the framework, with the current framework with regard to addressing the plight of refugees, stateless persons, and asylum seekers. If we look at it on the policy side, it has always been a tradition for the Philippines to have this humanitarian, long-standing humanitarian policy to take in refugees and stateless persons. And it's an open door policy that is the core, really, of the core policy of the Philippines. When you look at it from the legal framework, then you have the international obligations, the Philippines' obligations under the international treaties on refugees and human rights instruments. As mentioned a while ago, the 1951 Convention, 1967 Protocol, relating to refugees, the 1954 Convention on Stateless Persons, and the 1961 Convention relating to the reduction of statelessness. Then you also have other international human rights instruments, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the ICCPR, International Covenant on Economic and Social Rights, as ICESR, and also the CRC, Convention on the Rights of the Child, where some of these principles, especially the right to nationality, when we talk about stateless persons, it's also in the Convention on the Rights of the Child. So all this legal framework within the international, at the international level. Then we have at the local level, as mentioned by Attorney Ia, we have that under the DOJ, Department of Justice, DC 24, which creates the RSPPU, who makes the initial determination relating to the status of refugees and stateless persons who apply for recognition as refugees or stateless persons in the Philippines. So that is the initial determination, refugee and stateless status determination. And then, so they file it with the DOJ. From the DOJ, once a decision is made, if there is, for instance, a denial, they can file a motion for reconsideration, and then it goes up to the Secretary of Justice. From the Secretary of Justice, it goes up to the Office of the President, and then from the Office of the President to the Court of Appeals under Rule 43. Then from the Court of Appeals to the Supreme Court under Rule 45. Now, it's a different thing when you talk about naturalization. For naturalization, it's a different pathway. In this case, once a refugee, once an asylum seeker is a recognized, I'd like to emphasize that recognized, meaning to say they had undergone status determination and had been granted the status as refugee or stateless persons under the DOJ RSPPU. Then eventually, once they are able to comply with other requirements for judicial naturalization, then they will file for a petition for judicial naturalization before the regional trial court. Then from the regional trial court, it goes up by way of ordinary appeal to the Court of Appeals under Rule 41. And then from the Court of Appeals to the Supreme Court. So these are two different pathways.
And later on, we will talk to a refugee who went through that route after being recognized as a refugee. He actually eventually became a naturalized Filipino citizen. And we'll discuss more about the details about the rule on facilitated naturalization of refugees and stateless persons in a bit. But I just want to ask Attorney Ia, in the Philippines, what's the current refugee situation? Can you lay out, at least from your point of view as the head of UNHCR in the Philippines, how would you describe it?
Okay. Whenever I'm asked that question, I would always say that for UNHCR here in the Philippines, we are proud that the Philippines is walking its talk. As a state party to the Refugee Convention, the Philippines has allowed to have a favorable protection environment where refugees would not only survive but would really thrive. The policies that are being introduced allow refugees to be able to be self-reliant. Like, for example, the Department of Labor and Employment uh, has allowed refugees to work even in the absence of an alien employment permit. That was quite challenging in the past because it was like a chicken and egg situation because you have potential employers asking for refugees to show their permit, and at the same time, the Department of Labor would require and offer a contract to the refugees. But now refugees are able to be employed, even practice their profession, engage in livelihood. They their rights are actually protected in terms of what is being provided under the Refugee Convention. So I'm happy to say that the Philippines is currently hosting very few refugees in the country as well as asylum seekers. But of course, we are hoping that certain improvements could also be done. Judge Joy mentioned that there is a determination procedure under the Department of Justice, and we are hoping that that office would somehow be strengthened as an institution, because currently the unit is only doing an ancillary function. They're primarily state councils of the
Right.
Department of Justice. They don't have dedicated personnel who would just be doing
Refugee work.
Exactly. And that somehow contributes to some of the delays in the asylum applications. And as you know, every day that there is a delay in the status recognition, that affects negatively the dignity of the person,
Right.
as well as the predictability of the person to be able to thrive in the Philippines. So we are advocating strongly for legislation on a strengthened refugee office, but acknowledging the reality that it could take years for that to happen. We are actually strongly advocating, recommending for the Office of the President to consider creating that body with dedicated staff, dedicated resources that would not only focus on status determination, but also look into the protection issues of refugees, asylum seekers, and stateless.
And this would be under the Office of the President, or should it be under any other executive body?
We leave it up to the government to decide how it is to be done. But the rationale is that it's needed at this point. The delays are affecting the ability of the people to socially integrate also in the Philippines.
And when you
Because
talk about delays, are we talking weeks, months?
years. We're talking about
Years.
years. We're
Right.
talking about 5 years, 6 years,
Oh.
7 years. And
Do we have figures though? How many are applying and still are not able to get?
for asylum seekers, estimate of about 1,000 are still
1,000.
pending. And, we believe that the Philippine government has the skills. They have been, they have undergone training, international exposure. They're experts when it comes to refugee determination. But in the absence of resources that would be used for that particular purpose, no matter how skilled they are, they
Right.
wouldn't be able to do it because it needs time, right? You need to dedicate some time to really assess each application of asylum seekers because you want a fair, efficient status determination process.
And from your experience, Judge Joy, why do you think is this happening? Is there a factor that there are some misconceptions about refugees in the Philippines? I think there was a controversy a while back about supposedly accepting refugees from a certain country because they might be terrorists, so to speak. Are there some misconceptions that we have to address as a society about refugees?
Yes, actually, that's the reason why I'd like really to push for looking at it from an ethical perspective. Now, when we talk about ethical perspective, you look at the plight of refugees and stateless persons with compassion, respect for their human rights, basic human rights, and empathy. No, and part of that also is the accountability, not just of the country under its pledges or commitments or under international or with its international obligations, but also the accountability and responsibility of each person as a human being to treat another one also as a human being. And in other jurisdictions or in other countries, you will see that there really is that misconception that refugees are terrorists are coming in by way of the pathway of seeking asylum as refugees, or there in some jurisdictions they claim that the increase in incidents of crimes, no, relating to peace and order are because of immigrants and especially refugees. But that's not true. These are not based, or they are not justified through any statistics at all. This is just merely a kind of fear that is being instilled among people in a general way. But that is what we are trying to advocate now. As I said, it's really my personal advocacy would be on the ethics of care, meaning compassion, accountability, respect and responsibility, and empathy for refugees and stateless persons. If you will see and hear and listen to them, their journey from the time that they were forced to flee their homes, their journey through seas, crossing the borders, land borders, or through water borders, and the experiences that they go through their journey, and entering another country of asylum and waiting. It's the waiting in limbo that gives them that sense of hopelessness and anxiety. So that's something that I think for us, for each of us individual, we have to reflect on that. And that's a reason why we have World Refugee Day and National Refugee Day to let each person reflect that there are people who are probably, I mean, we should be thankful and grateful for what we have, but there are people who have gone through more traumatic experiences.
Right.
And it's not just for them, but even for their families that they leave behind, and the homes, families that they leave behind.
And you talk about real people, Judge Joy.
Yes.
And at this point, it might be helpful for our listeners if we bring in Mr. Jalal Aboughaula, a naturalized Filipino citizen and a former refugee who was joining us online to talk about his personal journey. You know, how he came to the Philippines, he became a refugee. He was based in Kuwait, but he's of Palestinian descent, but can't go back to Palestine. And so finally, a few years ago, he managed to obtain a Philippine passport. And let's listen into our discussion with him a while back.
Well, I came here as a student to study here, but I can no longer go back to the place that my parents staying there because of the war in Kuwait and Iraq. That's why I have to stay here in the Philippines. So I can stay here without a legal documents here, immigration, because my visa was a student. So I have, I seek help from the UNHCR, and they did help me for that one. My impression about the Philippines is a very hospitable place. Okay, the people is very friendly, and the government have a long experience in helping refugees. I know that they helped even long time ago during the Holocaust. They helped the Jewish people, and they helped the Vietnamese, and they helped a lot of people. Up to now, they are helping the Syrian. Before they helped the Iranians also during the war in Iran, and they helped the Palestinian a lot. I know the history of Philippines with dealing with refugees. It's very humane when it comes to accepting refugees.
And how did it go, Jalal? I mean, did you face any challenges in terms of resettling here in the Philippines?
Well, yes, in the beginning, yes, it was very challenging to start up my life financially. It wasn't easy to settle in a country. I wasn't programmed to stay in the Philippines, but I have to stay in the Philippines. So I have to manage my resources, manage my financial and experience, and try to build up myself here in the Philippines, depending on myself. I don't like to be burdened to any person or any country. That's why I work hard for so many years, so I can spend for myself and for my family.
And how are you now, Jalal? I mean, it's been what, 2 to 3 decades since you moved to the Philippines. Are you fully settled? You have your own life now, your family, or any plans of perhaps going back to Kuwait?
Actually, no plans of going to Kuwait because I cannot go to Kuwait because I'm a Palestinian. My
Right.
father used just work in Kuwait, and because my father cannot go back to Palestine, I don't think so. I will be going to Palestine. I have my family here. I have my wife. I have my kids here in the Philippines. Okay, and I have some businesses here in the Philippines. I established some businesses here, and thanks God, I'm successful with my businesses.
What message would you have for Filipinos who may not be aware about refugees here in the country, may not be aware about the whole refugee system? Do you have any message for them?
I would like to tell a lot of Filipinos, they are not very much exposed for the World Refugee. Refugees are a normal people. They are in a certain situation that they can no longer go back to their country, or they have to seek help of another country to stay in. They are ordinary fathers, sons, brothers, and sisters. They just look for a place to live peacefully in. And they like the Filipino to not to look at them as a burden, look at them as contributing people for the society to help building up the Philippine society. And thanks God, the Filipino is very friendly. Honestly speaking, they are very friendly and very hospitable people. It's not difficult to mingle with. It's not difficult to be friend with.
And finally, Jalal, just to close our discussion, what's one point you want to take away from our discussion today about your experience as a refugee to finally becoming a naturalized citizen? If there's a message you want to leave out there.
My message number one, I would like to thank the Filipino people, number one, for accepting me to be one of them. I would like to thank the Philippine government for giving that opportunity. I would like to thank everybody in the courtroom, from the judge up to everybody in the courtroom, for helping me. Be patient with me. I would like to also to thank the UNHCR for holding my hand all those years up to the time I become a Filipino citizen. Would like to thank everybody that make me now feeling at home, feeling secure, feeling like a normal person, and feeling that I'm in my country.
All right, and we're very happy to have you here in the Philippines, Jalal. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for sharing your experience.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
And just to close our discussion, perhaps one final word from each of you. And let me begin with Judge Joy, because I saw you tearing up while listening to Mr. Aboughaula. What gives you hope when you talk about or think about the future of refugees in the Philippines? And are there anything, or is there anything that you want more that could be done for them?
Okay, I share the same sentiments as Attorney Iya, and maybe because I have some kind of a personal investment on this. Before I took up law, actually, that was also one of the triggers why I decided to pursue law, because for a time I worked in a refugee camp. But at the time, we were handling the uh, the the processing of Vietnamese and Indo-Chinese asylum seekers who were due for resettlement in another country. Some of them to the U.S., Australia, and to Europe. I worked there as a teacher. And so it's really more of a lived experience on my part because most of my students, I was handling a class of former Vietnamese soldiers, a class of all teenagers, male teenagers, and a class of pregnant women. And they had different stories of their journey when they had to leave Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos. And at the time, as a teacher, you know, sometimes when you're young, you're so idealistic and you want to be able to solve the problems of everyone else.
Of the world.
Yes, of the world. So for me, it really, it's not just a matter of a work for me, but really more of a commitment like that trigger that I said, maybe I can do my own, in my own little way, do something about it. And I wanted to understand more what triggers all this, the movements, migration movements, displacements of people. And that was the reason why I decided to pursue law. And so, as I said, for me, it's also not just because I'm a lawyer and I'm a judge, but really more of my personal investment of a lived experience of having to know the journeys of asylum seekers, especially refugees and stateless persons, how difficult it is for them to leave home, leave their families, leave their relatives. So that's about it, Attorney Mike, for
That's,
me.
that's very heartwarming to know, Judge Joy. And talk about live realities. Attorney A, you've probably seen a lot of stories of refugees during your stint with the UNHCR. I just want to give the final word to you. On World Refugee Day, what would be your message to our listeners? What's the takeaway from our discussion today?
Okay, so today is actually World and National Refugee Day for the Philippines. And we want our listeners to take away a profound appreciation, not only for the resilience, but for the rich contributions refugees can give to their host communities. Communities that, for many of these individuals, coming from such challenging circumstances, symbolize home and hope. This is actually in alignment with the theme for this year's World Refugee Day, which is strengthening spaces for resilience and hope. The strength of refugees and overcoming adversity is truly inspiring, and our message is that by extending opportunities through education, through livelihood, through social protection, we empower refugees to build their lives and contribute meaningfully to their communities. So today, we in UNHCR hope that we can all embrace an inclusive agenda that recognizes the potential of every individual, fostering a world where we all can thrive.
And that was part one of our conversation with Judge Maria Josefina G. San Juan-Torres, member of the Supreme Court Special Committee on the Facilitated Naturalization for Refugees and Stateless Individuals, and Attorney Maria Ermina Valdeavilla-Gallardo, head of the Philippines Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. Next week, we continue our discussion with Judge San Juan-Torres, Attorney Valdeavilla-Gallardo, as well as Mr. Jalal Aboughaula, a former refugee turned naturalized Filipino citizen, as we talk about the rule on facilitated naturalization of refugees and stateless persons. Here's Steph Atendido Beltran, Supreme Court Information Officer, to give us a rundown of recent updates about the court.
From the Supreme Court of the Philippines, here's the latest. On Thursday, the Supreme Court introduced the eCourt PH portal, which allows lawyers to file cases before the SC, accept administrative and bar matters, upload pleadings, and track the progress of their cases anytime and anywhere. The court also announced that beginning July 1, 2025 until September 30, 2025, it will begin transitioning to electronic filing or e-filing for certain petitions and motions through the eCourt PH app, which is available on the Philippine Judiciary Platform or PJP, a unified online portal for court services, accessible at portal.judiciary.gov.ph. During this period, filing through the online portal will be in addition to paper-based filing under the rules of court. By October 1, 2025, e-filing in service through the PJP will be mandatory for covered pleadings filed by lawyers. This is pursuant to AM number 25-05-16-SC or the guidelines on the transition to electronic filing in the Supreme Court in preparation for mandatory e-filing starting October 1, 2025. More information on eCourt PH may be found at sc.judiciary.gov.ph/ecourt-ph. The Supreme Court has convicted a 68-year-old foreigner of rape and qualified trafficking for sexually exploiting a minor, holding that inviting and meeting with a minor for purposes of sexual exploitation is qualified trafficking in persons. It also differentiated rape from sexual abuse. The court en banc, through the penencia of Associate Justice Antonio Co. Jr., found that the foreigner forced the victim to go to his apartment to engage in sexual acts in exchange for money and under threat of uploading her nude photos online if she refused. He was sentenced to 40 years in prison for rape and life imprisonment for qualified trafficking in persons. The SC has also ruled that the 2-year period to claim a refund for erroneously paid value-added tax or VAT begins from the date the taxpayer actually paid the VAT to the Bureau of Internal Revenue, not from the date the taxpayer's suppliers remitted it. In a decision written by Associate Justice Ramon Paul Hernando, the SC's First Division modified the Court of Tax Appeals en banc's ruling and found that Melco Resorts Leisure PHP Corporation had timely filed its administrative and judicial VAT refund claims. The SC agreed with the CTA that Melco was not the taxpayer required by law to pay VAT and that the 2-year period should therefore be counted from the time Melco's suppliers filed their VAT returns and paid the tax. Melco's refund claim, the SC held, was filed on time, counting the 2-year period from the date Melco actually paid the VAT to the BIR, not from when its suppliers remitted the tax. However, the court denied the VAT refund claim as the payment was neither erroneous nor illegal. On Monday, June 16, former court administrator Raul Villanueva attended the court's flag-raising ceremony for the first time as an SC Associate Justice at the SC Courtyard. In his message to court officials and personnel, he expressed fealty to the rule of law and his commitment to observe impartiality and independence. He also intends to translate his penencias into Filipino to emphasize key rulings and doctrines. He likewise expressed gratitude to his colleagues at the Office of the Court Administrator, where he served for 15 years. On Wednesday, representatives from the revolutionary government of Zanzibar conducted a study visit to the Supreme Court in Manila, hoping to gain a comprehensive understanding of the establishment, structure, and operational mechanisms of the Justice Sector Coordinating Council, or JSCC. The JSCC is a collaborative mechanism for coordination and cooperation between the Supreme Court, the Department of Justice, and the Department of the Interior and Local Government. The JSCC has so far established 16 justice zones all over the country, dubbed Local Pockets of Efficiency. Supreme Court Associate Justice Raul Villanueva and justices from the Court of Appeals and the Sandigan Bayan, who head the technical working groups of the JSCC, welcomed the delegation. The delegates from Zanzibar Revolutionary Government's President's Office for Constitutional, Legal Affairs, and Good Governance was led by Deputy Principal Secretary Mr. Zeh Ali Haji. He was joined by senior officials Dr. Yusuf Suleiman Kalfan and Mr. Ikram Musa Suleiman. Undersecretaries Raul Vasquez and Deo Marco represented the DOJ, while Department of Foreign Affairs Office of Middle East and African Affairs Director Noel Rodriguez also attended the event. You are now up to date with the Philippine Supreme Court. I am Tiffany Beltran, Supreme Court Information Officer.
And that's our podcast this week. Join us again next time for a detailed discussion of select cases decided by the Supreme Court. I'm Attorney Mike Navallo, your Supreme Court Chief Communications Officer. You can catch this podcast on the Supreme Court Public Information Office's accounts on X, Facebook, Instagram, Threads, YouTube, and Spotify. You can also catch previous editions on our website and on Spotify. This podcast episode was produced by the Supreme Court Public Information Office with Attorney Karen Martinez, Jay Rimpilio, and May Sibal as researchers, Brian Austria, Lauren Solano, Austin Aliscad, and Bea Batong as audio and video editors, and Tyke Flores and Jerome Batumalaki as web editors.